Dr. McNamara is a highly regarded specialist in the Discovery and Wellness Center of University Hospital's Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Department. She is also a trustee of SPEA, and she is joining us tonight with some very important messages. Dr. Nora McNamara.
Hello, Cleveland. Okay, so before I get a little bit too tangential, Pat Lydon emailed me multiple times to make sure that I remembered to mention to tell you a few things. First and foremost, the reason for us to be here is to help adolescents learn to recognize the symptoms of depression and warning signs of suicide through our in-school program. So thank you, each and every one of you, for coming tonight. Second of all, she wanted me to remind you, and I can attest to this as a researcher in child and adolescent psychiatry, that depression is eminently treatable. One of the problems that we do have still is getting people, especially adolescents with depression, into us for treatment. And thirdly, that good research benefits all children and adolescents. And that's why I think I have the best job in the world. So I'd like to tell you a very short story, but before I tell a story, and I'm, by the way, very, very glad that my boss, Dr. Bob Ronis, is not here tonight, and one of my other bosses, Dr. Joe Calabrese, could not be here tonight, because they don't like me when I tell stories. So first, I want you all to rest assured that when I tell a story about treatment, everything important has been disguised so that you could never figure out who I'm talking about. And everything unimportant, things about me, are not disguised. All right? So I'm going to tell you a story from a long, long time ago during the Carboniferous period when I was an intern at Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital. And early on in my career, I thought I wanted to be a pediatrician. And so I spent a whole year, every third night, overnight at the hospital, learning what pediatricians do, which would mean some 36-hour shifts. Now, most trainees are able to sleep when they're on call, and I am not. I am just one of those people, if somebody's going to be calling me and I don't know if it's going to be for something trivial or something really critical, I just can't sleep. So when I was on call, I would walk around Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital, kind of like a police officer on his beat. And I would rock some babies, hang out with some nurses, and I spent a lot of time with a really cool adolescent who had a really horrific kind of cancer. So bad that the cancer didn't respond to standard chemotherapy and radiation, and this adolescent needed a bone marrow transplant, which can be hard enough for any adolescent. But this was a really fun kind of adolescent, my kind of adolescent, an adolescent with integrity, known for dropping F-bombs in front of attendings when he wasn't happy with what the attendings said about what he could and couldn't do, known for throwing trays of really bad food across the room until it hit the wall and slid all the way down. So he and I became really good friends that year, and we played a lot of Uno, we played a lot of gin rummy, and we had a lot of friendly, interesting discussions about who was a better musician, Van Morrison or Kid Rock. I think history has shown that Van Morrison is the better musician. And then he got really sick, and he was essentially in the PICU, which is the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit, for months. Most of that time in excruciating pain, and some of that time kept in a coma because his body was rejecting most of his organs because of the bone marrow transplantation. I never saw somebody so sick in my life, and so we couldn't play Uno. And many nights, instead of sleeping, I would sit near him in the PICU, and I would read out loud from my favorite novels when I was an adolescent, Isaac Asimov and Kurt Vonnegut Jr., because we shared a love of science fiction. Sometimes I would try and sneak in other things to try and broaden his horizons, because I wasn't sure if he could hear me or not. And it was a miracle, and he recovered. And just as he was getting better and able to leave almost a year of staying in the hospital, I was getting to leave a year of training in pediatrics to study child psychiatry, because that was more fun to me, learning and hearing his story, than actually getting the lumbar punctures and the bone marrow biopsies. And when I told my family about my decision to change specialties, I know you're going to find this shocking, but their uniform response was, yuck. Why would you ever want to study child psychiatry? And to this day, they don't understand. I have more fun going to work and working with my staff, and there's a shout out right now to the Discovery and Wellness Center for Children, big ups, than they could ever imagine. So this is the story that I tell them. Imagine how much pain it was for that adolescent to survive that horrific form of cancer. And imagine my surprise a few months later when I had my very first outpatient clinic for child and adolescent psychiatry as a resident, and this adolescent shows up in my clinic. I almost didn't recognize him because the puffiness from the chemotherapy was gone. His hair had grown back. His skin was no longer yellow. And also, something was gone that had always been there, even in the PICU, the light from his eyes. And indeed, one of my favorite teenagers on the planet was presenting with classical symptoms of major depression. Right? What are the odds? And so back then, we really had 0 FDA-approved treatments for adolescents with depression, so I used what we had free samples of available. And I gave him an antidepressant, and like most teenagers and most children, within about 6 weeks, he was back to his old self. And so then he was only coming to see me every 3 months for checkups to make sure he was good, and I would continue to try to indoctrinate him so he would have better taste in music. After about a year, he was still in remission and all the way better. And just like we do now, our practice is to then wean somebody off of medicine. Because with teenagers, because their brains are still developing, if you can treat the depression, they form new pathways in their brains, and most of the time, they don't need to be on medication for life. And there's only one way to find out, by withdrawing the treatment. This teenager, the same one that I told you would drop F-bombs to attendings and throw food, told me, no way, I'm never coming off of this medicine. And I couldn't believe it because I thought teenagers didn't like to take medicine. And he looked at me and he said, Mac, I'd rather get cancer again than get depression again. So somewhere out there is probably some 35-year-old, 40-year-old person, probably still with bad taste in music, probably still taking their antidepressant because, according to them, that year of being in the PICU and in a coma was far preferable than the few months that he had endured with symptoms of depression. So I guess that's my fourth point. Depression is treatable if we can get people in for treatment, and it's really, really, really bad, right? Since most of the children and teenagers that come to see us and participate in research or that we take care of clinically do graduate from our services, whether when they graduate from high school or move away or simply go into a permanent remission and no longer need our services, people that graduate from my clinic get a graduation present, and it's a copy of my favorite poem, and I'd like to share it with you if you're up for it. Yes? Okay. So this poet like many that we know of, also suffered from depression as a teenager and as an adult, and was hospitalized many times because of feeling suicidal. And he died in 1987, not from depression and not from suicide, but from cancer as an old man. And this is his work. This, to me, is his shining work. The name of this poem is The Laughing Heart. Your life is your life. Don't let it be clubbed into dank submission. Be on the watch. There are ways out. There is a light somewhere. It may not be much light, but it beats the darkness. Be on the watch. The gods will offer you chances. Know them. Take them. You can't beat death, but you can beat death in life sometimes. And the more often you learn to do it, the more light there will be. Your life is your life. Know it while you have it. You are marvelous. The gods wait to delight in you. Charles Bukowski. Thank you.